The Houston Rockets are 11-5. So Will and I, we have a guest with us today. We're going to talk about a few topics. Cam Whitmore being sent back to the G League, Steven Adams having early season struggles, and the Rockets turning down interest for Giannis. So what that could look like in the upcoming offseason. So stay tuned for this episode of the Bradeaux Show.
All right, and welcome back to the episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show. Today we are joined by a very, very special guest. First time on the show, long time overdue. Ben Dubose, someone who's been, I would say he's been a good resource for me and Brad as we kind of go on along this content creation journey. So thank you for joining us on the show, Ben. Thank you for helping us along the way. How you doing today?
Absolutely. Doing good. I think everybody's doing good these days with not just the Rockets are 11-5. That chart they put out during last night's game that they have the third best differential through 15 games in franchise history. Like they're plus, I think, 8.4 now, which that's even better than the 2018 team that won 65 games. Like it's not just that they're winning, it's how they're winning. And they stacked wins where, people can say, well, number one, the schedule is not as soft as people think. It's really middle of the pack. It's not murderer's row, but it's not super easy either. But secondly, it's not just that you win, it's how you win. And for them to be like putting up margins of +8, yeah, everybody's doing pretty good these days in this fan base, I feel like.
No, for sure, for sure. This is I saw the stat that they put on the broadcast yesterday. They had the third best net rating through 15 games in franchise history.
Right.
Along those lines. So amazing stuff. So Ben, again, as Will said, I'm happy to have you on, and we appreciate you for being such a great resource. So
For
I
sure.
was gonna kick it off too for this first topic. Let's talk about Cam Whitmore. One of the young guys on the team, youngest player on the team, actually. The Rockets seemingly took him out of the rotation after the Golden State game. They have been 8-2 since they removed him from the rotation. He got sent to the G League once. They brought him up recently, and as of today, he got sent back down. So, what are your thoughts on Cam Whitmore and his whole debacle right now?
Yeah, it's weird. And I will say that there were some people misunderstood what they did when they brought him back a week ago. It was simply because the Vipers had a week-long break in the schedule. So it wasn't like they were bringing him back necessarily to play. It's just if the Vipers don't have games for a week, then at least bring him up to the NBA level so he's working with, the Rockets coaching staff and, practicing and doing shoot-arounds and stuff like that. I mean, it's better than just staying in an apartment or wherever the hell he is in Rio Grande Valley doing nothing, So I think with Cam, he's sort of waiting out the first injury. I just published a preview for the two Rockets Blazers games coming up. And one of the things that stands out, the Rockets have been pretty lucky when it comes to injuries thus far. At the moment, they have none listed. The Blazers, most teams they've played have had like 4 or 5. So at some point, like last year, people forget that he only got his full-time rotation spot last year once Tari was lost for the year in January. Well, we didn't know it was for the year at the time, but it ended up being that. And so what ended up happening this year is that as Tari got scaled up, if you remember when he first started the year, Tari was just playing like 15, 20 minutes per game, wanted to make sure that his leg was good. Well, now that Tari's leg clearly is good, he can play back-to-backs, he can go 30 plus minutes per game if needed. Then now, it's those minutes that have come out of what was the Cam Whitmore pile, excuse me, to start the year. And so I think he's sort of in this no man's land. And I think, I understand what they're thinking, which is that it's better for him to play than sit at the end of the bench and do nothing unless it's garbage time. But at the end of the day, like what he needs to improve on the most, which is, they want him to move the ball more. It's tough for him to do that at the G League level because the competition just isn't good enough. And so when I'll give you one specific situation that I know they're worried about with him. So it's not so much the shooting. I mean, he probably was a little ahead of schedule last year. He's not as good of a shooter, but he's also not as bad of a shooter as when he started like 1 of 18 on threes this year, whatever it was. So he'll be okay. But like when he drives the ball inside and attacks the rim, they want him to have less tunnel vision. Well, it's hard to really work on that at the G League level because the guys defending the rim just aren't that good. And so when he drives to the rim and he's just able to, dunk it or lay it up, what is that really teaching him? And so it's sort of this awkward spot where they know what they want him to work on. Ime Udoka prides his offense. One of the things you hear about on social media, and this will tie into something a little bit bigger, but people will say, what is Ime Udoka's foundation on offense? I would argue that his foundation on offense is that there isn't a foundation. They really try and spread the wealth, and they think it's good for a couple of reasons. They think it keeps the defense on their toes and it makes them less predictable. And they think it also benefits Houston because it makes all the players, more engaged, more in tune because they're all touching the ball. And so I think that played into why they didn't go after James Harden in the 2023 offseason, because his style of play sort of goes against this share the wealth, attack in different ways, diversify. And I think with Cam Whitmore, when he gets the tunnel vision and, as Ime Udoka has said a few times, becomes a little bit of a ball stopper, then it's not just about, that possession. It sort of goes against the entire offense that they're trying to instill. So they know what Cam needs to get better at. I think Cam knows what he needs to get better at. And in a perfect world, the G League would be where he can, where he could do that. But in reality, it's just the competition usually isn't good enough for that specific skill set to get better there. So it's just sort of like, I guess it's better going to the G League than him at the end of the bench doing nothing. And I'm not sure how you can really play him more minutes without taking away from, Amin or Tari, which I don't think you want to do. But at the end of the day, I think what you're really waiting on is for the first injury. At some point, it is going to happen where somebody sprains an ankle. Hopefully, it's nothing like Tari last year, but at some point, somebody's going to, tweak a calf, sprain an ankle, something like that, miss, a week or two. And then once he gets some reps at the NBA level, I think that's where he'll really hopefully develop at this particular deficiency.
One, I wanna say knock on wood because you said we haven't had a injury yet. And I'm like, let me go ahead and put
Yeah,
that
man.
on. Yeah, I don't want nobody to get hurt after this podcast. But no, I'm glad you said that. And I was actually gonna ask you if you agree with me because I was gonna pretty much say everything that you just said, and I didn't know if
Sorry.
you were gonna. No, please. I'm glad that you said it. I was wondering if that was gonna be a hot take to you. So now that I know we're kind of on the same page, I've said it a couple of times on this podcast. I know I've said it in like spaces and stuff before. I don't really think the G League is going to help Cam. Maybe in terms of him like staying ready and staying active, like it's going to help him in that sense. But in the sense of what he needs to work on, the reason why he's not in the rotation right now, I think it's because of what you highlighted. I think it's because they need him to work on his decision making and his processing. We know that Cam
Yep.
Whitmore is an amazing scorer, or he can be. He's off star this year, but like I'm not really worried about the jumper not falling just yet. Like I saw enough of that last year to know that he's going to be able to shoot at the next level, right? The reason why he's on the rotation right now is because, like I said, the decision making, the processing. Sometimes we see Cam take an ill-advised shot, or he'll try to dunk over three people. The ball might stick in his hands, and stuff like that. I think that, no disrespect to Cam, I think Ime Udoka would struggle to trust Cam in a do or die situation sometimes because of that. And so, like, for a sound of a player is the Rockets trying to like harness that other side of him. I just don't know how you get him to do that in the G League,
Yeah.
because in the G League it's going to be like almost, I wouldn't say negative reinforcement, but it's the same thing. For what you said, also there's not even the rim protection in the G League, so it's not like he's going up there and learning how to like navigate when he's heading downhill. But more importantly, like, he's going to the G League and he's bar none the most talented player on the court for both teams pretty easily every single game he's playing. And so for him, it's like he's going out there. He's not, for me. I need Cam to learn how to play a role. That's the word I'm using. Is learn how to star in your role, and then you star in that role. We can scale you up, and now we can start talking about you being like a star all-star. I think that's in the realm of outcomes for Cam. Is like a star all-star kind of guy. So like we start you at a role though. He's not going to play a role at the G League level. He's going to play the role of the star. And then I can imagine that'd be kind of confusing is you're going to the G League, taking the most shots, having the ball in your hands a lot. You come to the team and it's okay, well, now the ball's in Fred's hand. Now the ball's in Reed's hand. Now the ball's in Amin's hand. We're playing through Şengün. And you're not, you don't have the ball as much. And we're not letting you shoot the ball as much as you did in the G League. I understand why that'd be a little confusing for him. So I don't know. I think he's in a weird, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to
What?
jump in real quick. I think he was a little bit miscast based on how he started his rookie year. I think there's a segment of the fan base that thinks of him as a shooter, but he's really not. I don't think, he's certainly not as bad as I mentioned, like the 1 of 18, the 1 of 19, however he started this year. But he's also not the guy, I'm sure y'all remember the first 20 or so games he played last year, he was shooting like above or right around 40% from
Yeah,
three.
lights
He's
out.
not that guy either. When you look into, the scouting reports, the college data, he's probably somewhere, mid to upper 30s if he takes the right shots, which, a capable shooter, but he's not like a Reed Shepherd generational shooting
Yeah.
prospect. And so I think there's a lot of fans who think of him, first impressions can last for a while with young players. And for a team that's had shooting issues for the most part the last 2 seasons, and a guy comes on the scene shooting 40% from three at pretty good volume, people are saying, why don't we play this guy? Well, in the long run, I don't think the Rockets see that as his model. They don't want him to be a floor spacer. They want him to be a creator. They want him to be, in an ideal world, he can do a lot of the same things that Jalen Green does, but at, a bigger body, as someone that has a couple more inches in height, that has some more bulk to him. But the difference between Cam and Jalen right now, Jalen's far from a perfect player, but even when he's missing
It's a better
shots,
processor.
I'm not going to say he never stops the ball, but Jalen's pretty good at playing within the flow of the offense. And, they benefit a lot from one thing you hear Ime talk about with Jalen a lot is the value of him being able to touch the paint and collapse the defense, even if, he's not finishing in a given game. And, in a perfect world, like one of the issues for Jalen that's tough to overcome, he's just a little bit undersized for his position and he's not that bulky. In a perfect world, Cam can give you some of the same benefits in terms of, the burst, the explosion. He's a little bit bigger. But where Cam is lagging compared to Jalen is that his processing isn't there yet. And that's okay. He is just year two and he's one of the youngest guys in his draft class. There's understandable reasons as to why. But in terms of how he gets to the next step, yeah, like the G League, I guess it's better than sitting on the bench, but I don't think it does a whole lot either. He's going to need NBA reps at some point, and that's where it's tough to have, a core seven along with, Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, or Jock Landale, at least 3 vets in the rotation as well. It's just tough, assuming everybody's healthy, to give everyone the reps they need at a given moment. But yeah, in the long run, I think that's where a lot of fans just sort of have a misguided notion. They think of Cam, at least some people on my timeline, as a shooter because of the way he started last year. That's not really the way the Rockets look at him. I don't think they see him as a bad shooter, but I don't think they see him as, a Reed Shepherd generational guy either. I think they view him as someone that primarily needs to create, make plays in transition and sort of break down the defense with his power, his burst, that type of stuff. And to fully unlock that, he needs to, not be a ball stopper, process and read the floor a little bit better. And ultimately, he's going to have to do that against NBA defenses to get where he needs to go.
And yeah, and in the G League again, you want him to not have that tunnel vision when he's attacking the paint. But
Right.
as we mentioned, the rim protection just isn't good down there. So it's kind of he is in a weird spot because what they want him to work on, as you guys already said, it's really hard for him to work on at the G League level. So it is an interesting spot. And Ben, again, y'all really touched on all the points. I'm at the back half of this conversation. So I wanted to reiterate, you don't want to take away minutes from Amin and Tari. Again, they're 8-2 since they cut Cam out the rotation. Tari's all the way amped up. So, I mean, I don't know what they do. I don't know the path for Cam necessarily playing this year. I don't know.
Somebody's going to get hurt. Come on.
That's the only way. Yep. Okay. Injury. Assuming knock on wood.
Yeah.
Assuming no injuries. I necessarily don't see it. But yeah, we'll talk about hypothetical trades at the end of this segment. We're going to be talking about Giannis and whatever. But
Yeah, that's the other scenario too, is if they make a big trade. But yeah.
Right. So outside of Cam, we did want to touch on Steven Adams. The Rockets traded for him at the trade deadline last year, traded some seconds, I believe. And I was excited for Steve-O. He's setting screens, getting Jalen open, big presence, defensively, getting a bunch of boards. Great to have Steven in, but he really looks a step slow out there, in my personal opinion. It stood out to me in the last game. He played in the first half and did not play in the second. And he didn't play in that last game either. And I want to say he was just a D&B coach decision. I could be wrong. But Ben, what were your thoughts on
And
Steven?
if you look at the advanced stats, they are staggeringly bad. Now, small sample, he's only played 81 minutes this season, but the net rating differential for on court versus off, he's minus 30. That is catastrophically bad. Now, small sample, I understand that, but it's been bad. And of course, of the 30, more than 20 of that differential is on the defensive end, where they are much worse when he plays simply because he doesn't move that well. Offensively, he's still working on it, but he at least provides some value with the screen setting that helps free up the guards from time to time. But yeah, it's not been good. I think with Steven, the biggest thing is going to be, the medical staff needs to read the situation correctly, and there needs to be honest communication. And hopefully that's happening behind the scenes, because there's a fine line between, is he trying to knock off the rust and, work back from a conditioning standpoint? I asked Ime Udoka about it before the Pacers game. He basically framed it as an issue of rhythm and timing for Steven. That's possible, but you also have to worry about a scenario like, I don't think anybody should give up on Steven Adams just yet. And the reason I would point to, it's just further down the bench. Jock Landale. We just went through this a year ago when Landale had a terrible start. This time a year ago, everybody was down on Landale. And we all know like his contract is year to year. And there were a lot of people that said, well, whatever. Landale's a failed signing. He'll be gone after the season. Well, no, what ended up happening, he was coming off an injury. He hurt his ankle playing internationally in the 2023 offseason. He said he could play. Training camp started about 6-8 weeks after that. It was a severe ankle sprain, so he wasn't quite ready. And when he did play early in the year, he was terrible. So Ime basically sat him down and said, look, we've got to do what's best for the team right now. And when he didn't play, it obviously allowed his ankle to rest up more, build more strength. And then when they gradually brought him back to the rotation as the year progressed, and then especially after Şengün got hurt, he was very good down the stretch of last season. So even if it's really bad, well, look, Landale a year ago was really bad as well, and he ended up being a good player from about the midpoint of the year onward. So it definitely could be for Steven as well. But what this comes down to is, understanding the reasons that he's bad. And so if it's just about, he's rusty, he needs to, after not playing for more than a year, get better from a conditioning standpoint, then okay. Steven is a good enough player. We've seen him, do a lot of great things at the NBA level. And in theory, 31 years old is not over the hill by any means. He can still be a good player. It's last year of his contract, so he should be incentivized to, prove himself on the market for next year. So if you think that it's truly rust and conditioning, not saying you play him every game, like, against Indiana, Steven was healthy. He was available. Ime Udoka just simply said they went with Landale because the matchup was better. That's fine. But you still give Adams some games to, try and knock off the rust because there's a reason you traded for him. There's a reason that, he's had so much success over a decade in the NBA. He can be a very good player. And so you don't panic. You don't sort of throw your process out the window because of 1 month coming off an injury, even if it's really bad. However, the point of distinction, is it rust and conditioning, or is the knee just not healthy yet? And if it's the latter, then quite frankly, you're doing a disservice to throw him out there because what he needs would be, time off to, rest slash get his knee stronger in the weight room, whatever he needs to do off the court to do that. And so hopefully those conversations are going on behind the scenes because I think that's what this sort of comes down to. Obviously, this isn't going well, but in terms of like, how do we get him to hopefully where Landale was last season? In other words, bad first month, but by the second half of the year, a good rotation player, then you got to understand, is it truly just the rust and conditioning, or is it, the knee just isn't right yet and needs more time? And so I think having those conversations behind the scenes is sort of the key to figuring out like what the best, plan is. And I will say, if the knee is truly okay and it's, primarily an issue of, rust and conditioning and timing, as Ime said it, he's a good enough player that even if it costs you a game or two on the front end of the season, like it probably did cost him that game in Milwaukee where, the first half he just got, the Rockets got run off the floor in those minutes. Other than that, they were the better team in that game. So if it's truly just about timing, I've seen enough in Steven Adams. I know the Rockets really believed in him going into this year that I would say, you know what, it's worth it. Not to give him an unlimited leash, but longer than a month to see if he can sort of tap into his old form. Not saying you let him play all 82 games or anything close to it, but just keep sort of doing what they've done, hope for the best. But if it's really the knee, then yeah, you've got to do something different because it's clear that the status quo isn't working and it's not going to work until his knee is in a better spot than it is right now.
That's a good point, Ben. I wanted to bring up. I never really. I mean, the Landale analogy was really good. Obviously, he finished the season last year really well. So if that's what it takes for Steven this year, I'm sorry about that. I got a phone call coming in. But yeah, if that's what it takes for Steven this year, I would be perfectly okay with that. I just need him to come to form by playoff time. This is obviously going to be a good Rockets team, regardless of someone calling me again. My fault.
You're popular, man.
Sometimes. But when it comes to Steven Adams, I just want to see him healthy at the end of the day. And that's what's going to be most important. So we'll see. If they have to sit him, I'm in favor of that. And I want to see him getting those minutes and those reps with Jalen. Again, I didn't like the minutes I saw with him with primarily, as Ben pulled up the stats, it was bad all around. But I do not like those minutes he has with Fred VanVleet. I think it's kind of productive when he's out there. I want to see him setting screens for Jalen, setting screens for Reed. I like to see him staggered with him. So when he comes to form, I think he's going to be a huge impact player when he's back to his normal self. But what would you say, Will?
Yeah, when we I don't recall. I should have refreshed myself and went back and rewatched the episode where we traded for Landale to see. I mean, not like for Landale, for Adams to see like actually what I said. But I remember, I don't know if I actually said it or if it was just not kept in the back of my mind. But I remember the whole time when we got Adams, a part of me was like, we know who Steven Adams is, and what he's done. We battled him in the playoffs a couple of times. He's really respected around the NBA. Like, we know who he is as a player. He's a starting caliber center, or at least that's what he's supposed to be, right? And so, like, on one hand, you're excited because it's like, okay, we have somebody who is well respected, has a good reputation around the league, and we know what he can do as a starting caliber center. And that guy's gonna be our backup center. And like, on one hand, you want to be happy with that, but in the back of my mind, I was always like, I think he's 31 years old.
Yeah.
He's had 2 season-ending knee surgeries. And at that age, that position and those type of surgeries, that usually starts spelling the beginning of the end. And so in the back of my mind, I thought there was always a chance that Steven Adams just did not look the way that we, anticipated him to look, based upon what you thought you were getting from the name Steven Adams. That being said, so like the season started, and like I think he's had some good moments. I think he's had some moments, like you said, the Milwaukee game where he definitely cost us. That second quarter is definitely one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, that we lost that game. So he's had his good moments, but he's looked a step slower. He doesn't look like the Steven Adams that we battled in the playoffs a couple years ago, or even the Steven Adams that was killing it in Memphis like a season or two ago. I forgot how long ago it was, but he hasn't looked like that guy just yet. Part of me wants to know, like Ben said, is it just rust? Is he still working his way back into games? Matter of fact, I think it's a combination of, I think it's a little bit of both. I think he's worked himself into game speed. I also think that there is a chance that he's just, he's getting up there in age. He's had some injuries that have ended his season. It just might be time. And for me, it's like, I know some people are gonna be mad. Well, it's like, oh, we traded 3 second-round. I think it was 3 second-round picks. Traded 3
Yeah, but one
second-round
of them
picks.
was like the last pick of the draft,
Yeah.
so it's basically 2. But
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, I know people are gonna get mad at whatever. To me, it's like, even if Steven Adams, like, let's speak worst case scenario, which knock on wood isn't what happens. I hope he does figure it out. I hope he becomes the backup center for this team, because obviously we're that much better if he's good at that. But let's say worst case scenario, he's just not. Like, we discern that we don't need him in our rotation anymore. We're better with Landale or with another option, or I don't know, maybe we trade for somebody else. I don't know. Even if Steven Adams is not a member of our rotation, I still think that it was a good trade, because you bring in somebody else who is an experienced vet to this locker room of a bunch of young men who don't know how to win at the next level. Steven Adams does know how to win at the next level. He's been in the playoffs a couple of times. He's been on great teams. He's competed with some of the best players in the entire league. So there's that perspective he can share with them. But then even more for like an Alperen Sengun, I think that mentorship from Steven Adams to Sengun was really beneficial. I think it kind of does 2 things. One, with Sengun, he knows, like, I think one of the biggest archetypes of centers that Sengun struggled against in his first couple of seasons was the big, strong, like, bruiser center. Like, the guy, like, he for some reason could never, like, Valanciunas used to kick him.
Yeah.
For some
To
reason.
your point, he's like a coach on the floor when you see him
Yeah.
in practice.
Yeah. And so, like, yeah, I think he can help Sengun. Like, that gives him his biggest weakness to practice against in a practice every game. And then offensively, I think we've seen Sengun's screens look really, really good this year. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's a coincidence that his screens look better after sharing an offseason with Steven Adams, who was one of, if not the best screen in the entire NBA. So I still think it was worth it, even if he becomes, trade bait, or he just, he goes to the end of your bench. Like, I still think it was worth it.
Yeah, you do have a $12 million expiring salary in the
Yeah.
worst case scenario. That trade component is not irrelevant. There is something to that for the small cost of basically 2 second-round picks, it's not a terrible deal no matter what. one other positive to Steven that I'll throw out there, he's one of the most self-aware guys that I've seen in the NBA. This is not a guy that has an ego. I think no one is more aware of his current limitations than Steven is himself. So this is not like a, Carmelo Anthony situation 6 years ago where a guy, comes in with a big name to the Rockets, but doesn't necessarily know his limitations at that point in time. No, I think Steven is aware. And so if it turns out that he just can't give them what Jock Landale does, and those two have a great relationship, then I think Steven will gracefully sort of accept that third string role, if you will, if Landale just turns out to be playing better, which to this point in the season he has. And so I think there is value in that. The fact that, you're not bringing in someone with a huge ego, even if he does have something of a name, not saying he's a Hall of Famer like Melo, but just saying, I think that's a recent Rockets example that people can sort of point to as someone that didn't necessarily accept where he was in his career. I think, if Steven doesn't come around, he'll sort of gracefully accept that, hey, like Landale's better for the team just because he has more. The one point that I would also raise on Steven, I think him not playing well and, some of the games that he has played, he's played the first half, but then almost nothing or absolutely nothing in the second, like the Milwaukee game's a good example of that. That's hurt Jalen as well. You know, I think y'all have gotten into it in the past. I know I have in my shows with Paolo and Jackson, but, people want to say, why isn't Jalen shooting more efficiently? Like that's, the big story that sort of hovers over this entire season, even with, all the good things going on. This fan base loves to pick on Jalen. I understand why, especially with the contract, there are expectations. Well, the way the starting lineup is set up is not necessarily conducive to getting the best version of Jalen. I think, one point I've raised a few times, and I think I've seen y'all pointing this out on Twitter as well. Jalen does better in certain configurations. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jalen's great month of March largely came after they were able to put Amen Thompson into the starting lineup because putting a second elite athlete on the floor with him has really, really helped to sort of, it doesn't allow defenses to load up as much on Jalen. And so I think that's why you've seen Ime Udoka try to, bring Jalen out in the first quarter and then bring him back in with Reed Shepherd and, Amen and Tari early in the second quarters. And Steven Adams was a part of that projected lineup as well, not because he's athletic, but it's like, hey, you have the best of the athletes, and then you have Steven setting screens. And so I think that was a big part of the formula for what they wanted to get out of Jalen Green this season. And I'm not saying that you should give Jalen a pass because of that. No, like, you get $100 million contract, there are expectations. And to this point, Jalen has not lived up to them. And I think, he's certainly aware of that. But just as a little thing to keep in mind, I think the Rockets knew that the starting lineup and the limitations in terms of the athleticism of guys like Fred and Dylan and Jabari, that's not necessarily the best for bringing out peak Jalen Green. And we know the concerns about, having, the best of Jalen and the best of Şengün at the same time. Well, one of the ways to sort of bridge that gap while everybody still works on the chemistry is to sort of put Jalen in those bench units. And so, let him run with Amen and Tari. Or last year, Jalen talked about wanting to play with Amen and Cam for the same reason. Jalen and Reed have shown some flashes of playing well together. And with Steven Adams, it's not that he's an athlete, but because of the screens, that helps Jalen get downhill. And so I think that's just a little thing to keep in mind. Not saying you should, give Jalen a blank check as far as, just unlimited excuses based on that. But I do think that Steven Adams not being what the Rockets expected through a month has had a little bit to do with those bench units and Jalen in particular, maybe not being quite as efficient as the Rockets expected going into the year.
Go ahead. I you want to say something.
I was gonna say that's a good point. I looked up the best Rockets 3-man lineups with Jalen Green, and it was just the starters. I was hoping it was with Reed or Min, and I was gonna bounce off your point with that, but that's not the case. But yeah. So I do agree. I would like to see Jalen, running a lot more, and I would like to see him in those units where he's maximized. But as you mentioned, when Steven's back up to par, he'll be able to do that. So we will wait on that. There will be a ramp up process, as you mentioned. So I think that was a good conversation starter for Steven Adams.
Go ahead.
No,
I thought you were to change the subject.
Oh no, I was going
And just I doubt he'll play in both ends of the back-to-back because I don't think he's to that stage yet.
Mhm.
One little thing to be encouraged by with Steven is that, these two games against he didn't play against the Pacers, but the Pacers and then the Bucks, he wasn't on the injury report at all. And so that's been the first time this year. Before this week, even when he did play, he was listed as questionable, right in the injury recovery. Now at least he's on the injury report. So hopefully that's a good sign, knock on wood, all that stuff, that, he's trending in the right direction. But I was going to say is against the Blazers, who have, Donovan Clingan, sort of the prototype traditional big that, very physical, operates near the rim. That might be, just as the Pacers, because they're a little bit lighter, that was a matchup that, Ime thought was better for Landale. Maybe one of these games against the Blazers and Donovan Clingan is one where you can sort of sneak Steven a few minutes and see how it goes. I think that's sort of, not saying I have super high expectations, but Clingan might be, he's the type of big that I think Steven might be a little bit more effective against.
I did want to add one more thing in before we switch topics. Be like once again, let's work worst case scenario, right? Or even not even worse, just kind of median outcome here. I don't like obviously Steven Adams at 31 years old, his time on this team, like maybe best case scenario, he finishes this season, resigns and plays one more. I would struggle to see him having 3 really good years in the Houston Rockets uniform just because of how his age and where he's at. So like eventually, sooner than later, this team is going to need to find another solution at a backup center. And, maybe Landale emerges. He's someone who gave pretty good minutes at times this season. So maybe he kind of emerges as that option. But one thing that I do kind of wants to look into, we have the Suns' first round pick this year. And that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about next a little bit. But we have the Suns' first round pick this year. And should they decide to keep it, which who knows, they might trade it. Who knows what happens with that pick. But should they decide to keep it, it's probably going to end up being somewhere in like the 20 to maybe like 27-ish range. Like the Suns are not a bad team, but they're also probably not going to be like, pick 30 good. So like it's gonna be a late first round pick ish. There's usually a good not starting caliber center, a good like rim protector in that range. But every year there's always about one guy who could go in that ballpark. He was like, yeah, this guy could be a good backup center. Like I think Khalil Ware was he 14 this year? I don't remember if he was 15. Okay, Khalil Ware was 15. I know Dayron Holmes was like 19 or 20 as well. There's a couple of the guys. I think Walker Kessler. Didn't Walker Kessler go in the
Yeah,
20s?
like early to mid 20s. And
Yeah.
let me jump in real quick because I just looked up the
Go ahead.
standings. So the pick from the Suns this year is actually a swap. It's a swap right. But
Okay.
based on the standings right now, so the Rockets pick would be at 25. The Suns pick would be at 19. So you'd move up from 25 to 19. So
Yeah. So and like you can like assuming it stays at like for example 19. There's probably some college where there's a center on that team who can come in and give you a good like 10 to 12 minutes a night just as a rookie. And that can kind of be the way that you have a backup center. He's on a cost control contract for the next 4
yeah,
years. So you got, have that time to evaluate if you want to extend, if he makes sense for your team long term. And that can be a way that we have a backup
yeah,
center in the minutes where Shingo needs rest or, knock on wood, he gets injured or whatnot. So yeah, I think
yeah.
that's if I'm
And
Stone, that's probably what I'm. I probably would draft BPA regardless, but I will be looking to like if there's a center there that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's who
I
I'll be
mean, it
targeting
is a
this year.
need, you're right. Landale's been okay this year. His net differential is about, even. So he's sort of like the prototype replacement level, I guess you could say. They've been a little bit better with Landale defensively. He's okay, but I think we all know, well, number one, he's not the youngest guy. Jock himself is getting, I think he's 28, 29, something like that. He got a late start to his NBA career because he played internationally. So it's not like he's a super long-term solution anyway. And he's also, we all know that contract was designed to be tradable. So that's another thing. At some point, you're probably going to need to trade in or to cash in the Jock Landale trade chip. And so one way or another, even if Landale does take advantage of this opportunity, should one open up if Steven continues to struggle, then yeah, you probably do want someone, a second guy after Şengün out of your young core. So I agree with you. That's a position they could target. I will say that this year, I would not be surprised that if this team, gets to the playoffs, that you see more of Jabari at the 5 once that happens. I think they don't want to do too much with Jabari at the 5 during the season because, it's a long 82 game grind. And so you don't want to, expose Jabari to the pounding of guarding centers all that much. But once you get to, the play-in tournament, maybe they're good enough to avoid the play-in tournament and get outright into the playoffs, then I could see, Jabari becoming the more full-time backup 5, sliding over and then opening up even more minutes for Tari and Amin that way once you get into a playoff setting. Don't think you'll see it too much during the regular season. Again, I think you want guys like Landale or Steven or, maybe you draft someone and, they take on that role. But I think as the Rockets get into more sort of optimizing playoff lineups, I think, Jabari is going to figure into that mix more and more as they get to bigger games.
Yeah, as we transition to the next combo, I want to give a quick shout out to Bari. Last 4 games, he's been playing really well.
Yep,
Stat
sure
wise, over 50% from three, 57% from the field. And then shout out to Ben's dog as well. Very,
Yeah.
very cute dog in the back.
Yeah. Truman wanting to make his cameo. Yeah.
There we go. So last topic for today. It's been a talking point. The Bucks had a very slow start to the season, so naturally he was thrown in trade conversations. And the Rockets, I mean, they naturally had the best package out there of any team that would be interested. All the picks, all the young guys, and the Rockets recently came out and said, Kelly Ego reported, they were not interested in breaking up the young core. For Giannis Antetokounmpo. And to anybody else who's not a Rockets fan, that probably sounds insane. Like, they're not breaking up the core. Like, who is the core and this and that? But it makes sense to us. We watch the Rockets, every day. We understand. Ben, I wanted to hear your thoughts. What was your take initially when you heard the Giannis news? Were you a fan of it? Were you like, okay, this could work? Or what were your thoughts?
I'm sort of torn. Like, I won't say it's a terrible idea. Look, he's a 2-time MVP who's still close to that level. Maybe he slipped a tiny bit defensively, but he's still a top 5 player in the world. And, he's under contract for at least 3 more years, and he's still putting up over 30 and 10 per game. So even if I don't stylistically like his style of play, which anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I don't, I still stand by James Harden's, run and dunk comments from the 2019 MVP battle. I can't argue with you if you point to a proven MVP and a Rockets team that doesn't have the him on a playoff team, at least an established him. We hope Şengün can be that guy. Maybe Amin and Tari are turning into, those types of players as well, but they haven't done it on a sustained basis just yet. I can't argue with you if you say, look, man, Giannis is proven at a level that nobody on this team is even close to. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's a terrible idea. However, first off, I think it's smart of Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office to, get in front of the narrative a little bit. Because even if they wanted Giannis, there's no way it could realistically happen this year anyway. Because, it's tough to see a deal making sense for both the Bucks and the Rockets unless, either Şengün or Jalen Green is in the deal. And those two guys are, for the most part, untradeable this year. Even if you were interested, and I don't think the Rockets are, because when you sign extensions, it becomes, it's the poison pill, the base year compensation, they count as more outgoing salary than they do incoming salary or vice versa. Point is, David Weiner, Beam a Thug, did a great article over at Clutch Fans. You can just go to clutchfans.net and read that if you want the particulars. But the bottom line is it's almost impossible, even if you wanted to trade Şengün or Jalen this year. And I don't see a 30-year-old Fred VanVleet being appealing to the Bucks if they're trading Giannis because they're going into a rebuild. So how do you make the math work if you're not trading, Fred or Jalen or Şengün for a guy who's making like $50 million plus per year, a super max contract? There's just no way it would work. And so if a deal is pretty much unrealistic this year, no matter what, then why don't you just get in front of the narrative and say, we're not interested? Because you don't want this storyline hovering over the team. And it picked up more steam this week. Mark Stein had that thing, which he wasn't saying the Rockets were interested, he's saying that other teams are suspicious that the Rockets could be interested. And then the Rockets played the Bucks, and how stuff happens on social media, it takes on a life of its own. And so I think some of this is the Rockets just wanting to sort of get ahead of the narrative. It can't really happen anyway. So you might as well just shut it down and let these young guys, focus on the games because they're playing amazing ball right now. So I think it's smart of the Rockets to say that. But then even if, ultimately, whether they make a deal that's that big, it's going to depend on how this year plays out. Because, like, the ideal scenario, people get, I think it's sort of misunderstood, this whole notion of the Rockets and superstar trades. It's a good plan B, but it is plan B. Plan A is that the young core works out. Plan A is that you build a sustainable contender organically, much the same way that Denver's done with Jokic and Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. If you think back to like 2020, 2021, people talk about the Nuggets being like a suitor for James Harden when he was asking out of Houston. And Denver never made a move of that magnitude. They just had it work out organically. Now, I'm not saying for sure that's going to happen here. Like, I'm not saying for sure that Şengün is going to be Nikola Jokic. Let's not get crazy. But you don't want to foreclose that possibility. And so that's the ideal scenario, because if these guys work out internally, you can have a sustainable contender for 10, 12 years. I mean, these are guys that are like 22, 23, 21 years old for the most part, some even younger than that. So that's plan A. It's just not fun to talk about because what else can you say other than just give it time? We'll see how they progress. So we talk about all these hypotheticals. Can they go after Giannis? Can they go after Devin Booker? Anybody else? Those are hypotheticals if plan A doesn't work out. Well, right now, plan A is working out. And so, if they do take a leap this year and say win 50 plus games and a playoff series, and Şengün looks like he can be the lead dog on a team that makes serious noise in the playoffs, then I don't think you need to sort of expedite the timeline for someone that's 30 years old and is probably only has 3 or 4 prime years left, and you disrupt your chemistry through doing that as well. And so I think sometimes that gets lost. Like the entire notion of superstar trades, that's not plan A. The Rockets are compiling assets so they have that option if the current young core doesn't fully work out. But ideally, the current young core works out and they don't even have to make a big trade. I think that's something that gets lost in all of this. But then the other thing I'll say with Giannis, I know, Brad, we were talking back and forth, when we were talking about, our discussion points for today, and we're talking about, Giannis versus other targets like Devin Booker. I could see De'Aaron Fox maybe being one as well, given his Houston ties. There's no extension with the Kings. One other reason I'm a little bit skittish on Giannis, he would totally transform the way you play in that, even if you could somehow keep Şengün and not put him in the deal, Giannis has never played with a big man like Şengün. He's always had Brook Lopez, a total floor spacer, or Bobby Portis, which is, like a small ball 5 Jabari type. He's never played with someone like Şengün. You would also have, whether you keep Şengün or not, Giannis, Amin, Tari, Jabari, you would be so front court heavy, not sure how the rotations would pan out. And obviously, you need to ideally put more shooting and spacing around Giannis. You would sort of have to transform your entire roster, the way you play. And honestly, that might even cut into, we say he has 3 or 4 prime years left before probably by the mid 30s, he starts to decline a little bit. Not everybody's Braun. I think, for the most part, it's safe to say 34, 35, these guys are going to start falling off. Then you might lose a year in this sort of transition phase. So that's where, I wouldn't completely foreclose the Giannis path. If for some reason, I don't think it's going to happen at this point, but like, let's say you go 41 and 41 again and you don't take a step forward, and maybe at that point Giannis isn't interested in coming here. But if for some reason he is, you can get him. Then you say, you know what, whatever. Even if it cuts short our timeline and we only have 3 or 4 years, then it's still worth it. But if you feel pretty good, as crazy as it may sound, based on how good Giannis is as a player, it would be so transformative to the way they are building. It would almost be like going back to square one in terms of the offense, the principles that Ime Udoka has in place. I actually think, and beggars can't be choosers. It sort of depends on who's on the market, who's available. But the two names that we have heard the Rockets most consistently linked to in terms of, not just speculation, but people with actual ties to the Rockets saying they could be interested are Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell. Now, I think Mitchell's off the market now with, the Cavs are like 16, 17, 1, however good they're doing. But I think
You're stealing my talking points again, big. Go ahead.
Sorry, but I
that's
think
what I was going to say, bro. Go ahead.
you hear the Rockets connected to, guys like Booker and Donovan is because what they would not really transform the way the Rockets play. You could slot them in, quite frankly, to exactly where Jalen is now, but give you peak Jalen on a much more consistent basis. They can give you the version of Jalen that you had in March and, do it more sustainably. And so getting someone like that, you might could throw De'Aaron Fox in the mix as well. I know he's technically a point guard, but come on. I mean, positions are more interchangeable than ever these days. I think he and Şengün could work in much the same way that, Fox and Sabonis have worked in Sacramento. But the point is, you get one of those guards, they're much more of sort of a drop in, and you can still sort of play the same way. You can, ideally you keep Şengün in the deal. And so Şengün's already used to sort of having to, develop chemistry with Jalen. Amin and Tari, they're already playing off, Jalen and Şengün. We know Fred is sort of having his usage go back and forth. So, not all of these guys are going to be on the roster if you make a big trade. I'm not naive to that. But the point is, you can largely drop in a Booker or De'Aaron Fox, or in a hypothetical world where Donovan Mitchell were available, you could drop them into the current formula and it would still work pretty well. It wouldn't be like you're starting from scratch. And so in terms of what Ime Udoka's been trying to build, you'd still, it wouldn't be like the last season and a half or close to season and a half is for nothing. As opposed to with Giannis, I know the talent is good, but you would almost be starting from square one. And so that's why I think in a perfect world, a guy like Booker and, Will already pointed to the Phoenix picks that could give you an advantage there, or maybe De'Aaron Fox. To me, someone like that it's just an easier fit in terms of making it work with Ime Udoka and with the young core that's already in place.
I'll let you go.
So I told Brad, and Brad can vouch off camera, I told him that I wanted to make the argument to you why Devin Booker makes more sense than Giannis, and you took verbatim
Sorry, man.
everything.
Yeah.
No, it's all good. I was gonna make the argument. I just gotta, I guess.
No, I've just been thinking about it this week because of the obvious, but yeah.
No, I've done a lot of thinking about this over the last 48 hours as well, and this pretty much everything you said for the most part is what I was gonna say. But yeah, I was gonna try to make the argument to you and the viewers that as crazy as it sounds, I know Giannis is top 5 player in the game, and he obviously can play at a top, like he could be the best player in the NBA on any given night. And like there's only maybe 5 guys in the NBA who can say that on any given night they are the best player in the entire association. I mean, Giannis is one of those guys. So even though he's that guy, I think that as crazy as it sounds, it makes more sense for the Rockets to target a Devin Booker. Number one, and I'm gonna knock this one out quickly. I think people don't really address, like we talked about a couple times on this podcast, but I talked about with Steven Adams and his knee surgeries. Giannis had 2 of those as well.
Yep.
And he had the one where he gets his knee cleaned. And I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that means it's like might be bone on bone now, right?
Or something close to that.
Yeah,
and I just think, like, generally speaking, the way he plays, it's tough to sustain
and
over
that's what I
a
was gonna
long
say.
career.
So
It's a
like
very physical stop.
when he plays the way that he plays, and he's already missed time. He missed the entirety of the 2024 playoffs, and I think he played 2 or 3 games in 2023, but he missed for the most part of the 2023 playoffs as well. So you have a guy who already missed time in the postseason with knee injuries. He's getting up there. He's still young. I think he's 29 years old, but he's starting to
He turns
turn
30
that
next
corner.
month, so he's getting up there too.
He's starting to turn that corner, and like Ben illustrated, he doesn't play. He's not like when Kevin Durant, to a lesser degree, this is a different analogy, but when Kevin Durant tore his Achilles, there was like good optimism that Kevin Durant could come back and still be Kevin Durant, because Kevin Durant's game isn't based upon being the tallest, strongest, fastest, jumping over you, out muscling you. His game is his real finesse, skill. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what his game is. Giannis is the complete opposite. We just got a view of it the other day when we played them. He's very much, I'm going to barrel into you. I'm going to be stronger, faster, jump higher than you. Like that's his game. And it works because he's 7 foot tall, and he's one of the most athletic guys who's ever touched this earth. So like it works for him. But what happens to his game when he's not the most athletic guy on the court anymore? What happens then? Is he still giving you top 5, almost best player in the world output? And then this is, mind you, you would be giving up the trade package that you're giving up. You will be paying for the best player in the league. And you may not be getting the best player. You might get him for like a season or 2 before he kind of starts to like dwindle off. And obviously, you if I told you that you would only have like 2 years of Giannis being that good, you would give up a different package in a trade for him. So that's one thing that concerns me. Devin Booker has his own like host of injuries, but nothing to that degree of concern. And he's also, he's I think about a year and a half younger. So that's one argument I'll make. The next argument I was gonna make, kind of same thing, is Devin Booker is going to cost us a lot less. Giannis, same thing, top 5 player, best player in the world. That price on that brick is going to be like pretty expensive, and like rightfully so, right? He's a really good basketball player. And like if I'm Milwaukee, that's the best player in their franchise history. Maybe outside of Kareem, that's their guy. And so like, yeah, I understand why they would be hesitant to kind of let him go for anything other than like the most they could extract out of the team that they're going to trade him to. Versus with Devin Booker, one, just by virtue of him not being the best player, in the league, his price tag is gonna be a lot lower. But what the Houston Rockets can offer the Phoenix Suns in this hypothetical where Devin Booker is, on the trade block, what we can offer them that no other team can offer them is the ability to rebuild. They have to come through us to get their picks back, so they can tank, do the whole process that we did when James Harden left. They can't do that without us. It's the same reason why when Mikal Bridges got traded from Brooklyn, we had to be involved. Even though we didn't get Mikal, they had to involve us in that deal, because you trade Mikal away and you hit the reset button, but you don't have no draft picks. Like you're just giving Houston top 5 picks every year. Like you're not rebuilding. You're just, doing, I don't know what you would call that. That's what the It's what they did when they traded KG and Paul Pierce away the first time, right? And
Yep.
so, like if Phoenix intends to rebuild, it has to be through us, and so we can give them something that another team cannot give them. And I think that would also kind of reflect in the price point, because one of the selling points would be we're not just giving you, these young players and these picks, we're also giving you the ability to rebuild your roster. And so, like, I think that's another price point, or another reason why the price point would be different. So I think he's cheaper than Giannis as well.
Yep.
And then I think the third and the most important part was what Ben touched on, is if you trade for Giannis, because he is going to cost you a lot more, and because he's such a unique player. One of the reasons he's so good is because he's strongest, fastest, athletic. We've never seen anything like that.
And Milwaukee's built their team around him for years.
Yeah, you have to design your roster a specific kind of way to facilitate his success on your team. But you cannot just throw you like Giannis is not a type of guy you can just plug and play on a roster. You have to, once you get Giannis, he is your team, he's your identity. You have to build around him.
Yep.
And that, like I said, that's after you already trade away everything you trade to get him. You have to take what's left over and then start building around him. And now you start talking about, like what Ben was touching on, this is at that point almost an entirely different team. Like it's no longer the Houston Rockets. Like what we've found success on this season has been playing for, not just one person, playing for one another. The ball moves. We have an identity on defense in terms of, the grit and determination, getting out in transition, stuff like that. Like that's kind of what we've built. I think it's what Ime Udoka wanted when he took over this team. I think he wanted to build an identity. I think that's one of the reasons, like Ben touched on, why we didn't say yes like a James Harden, because I think he had a vision for how he wanted this team to look. And if you trade for Giannis, that probably goes out the window. Now, to be fair, Giannis is top 5, so like he's gonna be like, he'll make your team better per se, but you lose kind of what makes you 11-5 special if you do that, in my opinion. Versus with a Devin Booker, once again, he's not going to cost you as much, and you can just, like you said, Ben, you can just plug him into a Jalen Green role, and he's not going to play like all of our strengths that we found success with this season. Devin Booker can do that, while he also addresses all of our weaknesses, right? One of the biggest weaknesses of this roster is we did need Jalen Green to kind of step up and be that perimeter threat, provide the spacing, and more importantly, run the two-man game with Şengün. And, I believe I'm fine giving Jalen some more time to figure that out, turn that corner. Like this trade obviously would happen probably in the offseason. So like Jalen has theoretically the entire season to show us that he can. You want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, I wanted to turn this around. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Devin Booker is the ideal, but some of this is outside the Rockets' control, in that you just have to wait and see what happens with the Phoenix Suns. I mean, to this point, it's been a relatively encouraging start. 9-7. It's not that great. I think they've lost 4 in a row. KD, I know he's hurt, but I mean, he's 36 years old. It tends to happen when guys are 36, and it's the same calf that he injured with Team USA over the summer. So that's not nothing. I mean, that's the kind of thing that can linger. And, if the Suns have an underwhelming season because KD's in and out of the lineup, that's ideal for the Rockets because it would open the Booker door. But it's largely, again, like out of the Rockets' hands. You just have to sort of wait and see what happens in Phoenix as to whether that's viable. Let me turn this around and ask you guys, and, I can turn this to Brad first. I mentioned De'Aaron Fox earlier. I think he's someone that's, he's not as good as Devin Booker. He's very good, but Booker is the ideal. However, I think he's even a year younger. Giannis is about to turn 30. Booker's 28. I think Fox is 26, about to turn 27. So he's even closer to alignment. And the reason I bring him up, so he turned down the extension in Sacramento. I know that's not necessarily because of the Kings. It could be because by waiting a year, he can get the Supermax, yada, yada. But the Kings are one of those teams, it feels like they sort of plateaued, sort of made the best they could, but how do they get to that next level? And so if he eventually wants out, and he's at a point where he has more leverage, and he has ties to Houston, and by the way, Jalen has ties to Central California. He's from Fresno. Sacramento is, I think, the closest NBA team to Fresno, and so he's got roots there as well. And so, the obvious pushback would be, well, if Fox and Sabonis weren't good enough to get to the top tier of the West, why would Fox and Şengün be? Well, number one, I think Şengün has more upside than Sabonis. But even aside from that, what I would argue is that Houston has guys like Amin, Tari, and hopefully Jabari jumps into this tier as well. These 3-and-D role player types. Well, Amin doesn't have the 3 yet, but he's getting better. But these are guys defensively that are way better than, the cast of characters they've had in Sacramento, like, Keegan Murray, Harrison Barnes. Who do they have the 2 now? I think it's Herder. Like, there's a lot more upside from Amin and Tari and hopefully Jabari as well. Like, if you could put those guys in Sacramento, I think Sacramento would have a lot more upside than they do right now. So I guess, the question I have for you guys, ideally Booker is plan A. Well, it's not ideally. He is your plan A, but whether it works out, it's just sort of like, keep your fingers crossed. Let's see how things play out in Phoenix. If Booker isn't available, are you guys interested potentially in De'Aaron Fox as a backup plan? Because the more I think about it, I sort of am. Some of the same points that Will just raised for Devin Booker, I think they sort of apply to Fox as well. And I think there's potentially a pathway to get him here. Again, he has ties to Houston. Jalen has ties to California. I think, his contract is up sooner than Booker, so there's more of an inflection point in the near future. Again, I'm just sort of dot connecting, but not the Suns, the Kings are off to, I think, like an 8-7 start. And, 2 years ago, they were a feel good story. Last year, sort of, again, the word I keep going back to is plateaued. And it feels like, they're at this sort of good, but not great level. I don't know how they take that next step. So if Fox says, you know what, I want to go somewhere I can contend, are you interested in him?
I'll say this really quickly. With Jalen Green, as you mentioned earlier, Ben, he is, your plan A. If he works out, then cool. That's what we're doing. But assuming he's struggling and Devin Booker is not there, I would personally be interested in a De'Aaron Fox trade with the Sacramento Kings. I think Fred would maybe have to be gone in that scenario. I'd like to see De'Aaron on ball a lot more. But again, as you mentioned, the Kings is a different story than the Houston Rockets. Even with the Fox and Sabonis duo, the Rockets are just a way better team than the Kings. The Kings have never been a top 5 defense. The defense is a different story. The offensive firepower that the Rockets are desperately in need of, even right now that they're 11-5, the offense is still it's not good. The efficiency is awful. They're still bottom 5 in the league in efficiency. Getting a great player like De'Aaron Fox, and of course Devin Booker as well, but a player like De'Aaron Fox, the same dynamic idea as Jalen Green. Extremely athletic. He fits in with the rest of the Rockets young core. I would love it. And again, I'm the same year as De'Aaron Fox. Grew up watching him in high school. It was killing on my high school team. So yeah, I love De'Aaron Fox. I would be cool with that as an option. But yeah, ideally, again, if Jalen does not work out, and the Kings continue to, not the Kings, but the Suns continue to, you start to struggle and 5 losses in a row, then that Devin Booker conversation becomes really interesting. That would be my plan A, as you mentioned. What would you say, Will?
Yeah, I trade. I love it. Same idea for Book, which, like to Ben's point, is out of our control for the most part. It is kind of just jumping the gun and hoping that Phoenix kind of implodes, and then the owner doesn't want to pay the luxury tax on a team that's that volatile. The reason I say that, though, because De'Aaron Fox is a great player, it's the 3-point percentage. Like, I know he's a much better shooter than he was when he entered the league, and he gets guarded, on the 3-point line. He's not getting guarded like a Russell Westbrook or like a Min. But he's at the same time, he's not the level of shooter, especially like in the mid-range area.
He's gotten better, but he's not elite.
Yeah. And so that's
like
why
I would. Yeah.
I'm in, like, if we strike on a Devin Booker and maybe some other things don't go our way, and like it's D Fox is the best option available, I'm not saying no to it. I would absolutely like do that trade. It's just, to me, that's not plan. It's not like
it's
obviously
not
plan A. Yeah, plan A is obviously that it works out with the guys that we got. Plan B is in pivoting to Booker. There might be some other guys in the mix that I would maybe consider trading for before I get to D Fox. But if like nothing else works out, I think D Fox is a great player. He's a top 25, probably. That might be selling him a bit short, honestly. Player in the league. I do want to say one thing, and then I kind of turn it over. I do appreciate that I am amongst people who kind of share. I thought I was going to make the argument to you, Ben. So I'm glad that I'm amongst people who share the same sentiment, because I did have to make this argument yesterday in another room, and they thought I was crazy. So I'm glad that
they thought you were crazy for Devin Booker in Houston?
They thought I was crazy for saying I'd rather have Book than Giannis. Yeah,
that's not crazy at all. I mean,
I made the points that I made here today. Some of the points, like I said, that Ben kind of made before I got to get to them. So that was really good to hear somebody else.
People just don't think of it enough in terms of like a specific team construct. Like Giannis is a better player than Book for sure, and that's as deep as some people get, especially if they don't follow the Rockets. But if you follow the Rockets,
it wasn't Rockets fans I was arguing to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, they thought I was crazy for saying it. So like, I am glad that I'm not crazy. I'm making sense in what I'm saying. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. I think that if this current like iteration, like it's mainly on Jalen at this point in time, if he doesn't kind of emerge as that kind of guy for us, I think Devin Booker is like the perfect solution for us. But to your point, not necessarily in our control. There's probably a bit more smoke with Giannis being unhappy at this point than there is with Devin Booker. So
Right.
just something to monitor though.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is with Devin Booker, I really loved how he played with Team USA in the Olympics. Really showed that he can play a role, lock in on defense, which would be perfect for Ime Udoka. But for all the points we already mentioned today, that's all I have. I agree with everything you guys said. We're all on the same page. Ben, I want to plug your stuff really quick. Host of the Laker Line, you got to tap in with him there. Amazing. If you want to follow his Twitter, you'll never find anyone that will get on the refs more than Ben. And I wanted to start the podcast with this.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Ben, man, talk
Oh,
to the refs.
I'm back on my BS this week after Giannis had his size 20 foot clearly out of bounds. That one triggered. Well, not only was it the game deciding play, which is always going to trigger me when it involves a Houston team, but dude, he has some of the biggest feet in the NBA. I noticed it live. I tweeted before I even saw the replay. I was like, I'm pretty sure Giannis was out of bounds there. And then not only do they miss the biggest guy on the floor with the biggest feet standing out of bounds, the official whose baseline is not even looking. I circled him. I did the old school John Madden, telestrator thing. He's looking down court. Like that is your one job as a baseline official to make sure, and they're not doing it. So yeah, wish the Rockets could protest that game because God damn it, that's annoying.
Yeah, that could be 7 straight wins right there. But yeah, definitely follow Ben on all socials. And again, we want to thank you. And I don't know how this was your first time on the show, but thank you for finally.
We'll do it again sometime. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and we'll get you on. And I'll have to pull up to the Laker Line. I don't think I've been on.
Yep, let's do it.
We'll make that happen. But Will, if you didn't have anything else to add, we appreciate y'all for another episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show. We'll be back soon. Thank you.